Welcome, everyone, to the premiere of our speaker series today, The Artist in the Art Therapist and the Artist in You. I'm Elizabeth Bryan-Jacobs. We're so thankful to see you all here and hoping that you and your loved ones are all well and safe. Now, I'm excited and honored to present my co-host and esteemed first guest in this series, Dr. Barbara J. Fish. And in Barbara's tradition, Barbara, would you please say hello and chime us in?
Yes, hello, everyone. I am so excited and happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be able to share some of my ideas and my images and my process with all of you. And I'm looking forward to a wonderful, rich exchange. So I'm going to chime us in, which is a practice that I like to use at the beginning and end of my sessions and my meetings. So.
Thank you, Barbara. And so everyone knows there's so much to share about Barbara. I'm going to highlight parts of her career. She is the 2019 recipient of the American Art Therapy Association's Honorary Lifetime Membership Award, which is the association's highest honor. She is an artist, art therapist, and author of her book, Art-Based Supervision: Cultivating Therapeutic Insight Through Imagery. Barbara has also presented her work nationally and internationally. She has worked with children and adolescents who are primarily wards of the state, dealing with psychiatric and substance abuse related issues. She has developed, supervised, and evaluated programs in a wide range of settings, including hospitals, residential programs, and schools. Barbara has been an art therapy educator at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for more than 30 years. And she now focuses on teaching, training, and supervising emerging art therapists, both privately and at the master's degree program at St. Mary of the Woods College. So that's just a tiny bit of Barbara. A little bit about me. Most of you know I'm Elizabeth Bryan-Jacobs. I'm an artist. I'm an emerging art therapist. I'm an author. I'm also the founder of Creative Awakenings, which is a creativity retreat program that I've shared nationally for almost 20 years. Also founded the Spread Your Wings Project, which is a national nonprofit devoted to sharing the healing powers of the arts. And I am now pursuing a master's degree in art therapy at St. Mary of the Woods College, where I was just so blessed to have Barbara for my professor, which is how we met. And there are really not enough words here, but it's an understatement to say that Barbara's work and wisdom has transformed my life. And I am so not alone in this. Barbara's art, her way of knowing, her wisdom, her insight, everything about Barbara inspired this entire speaker series, which I am so privileged to co-host with her. Anyhow, I am just so excited for today's program and for Barbara to share some of her wisdom. So I'm inviting all of you to take a deep breath, stretch up a bit, settle in, and get ready to have your imaginations ignited. So she loves that. It's true. Without further, no pressure. We're going to begin with kind of giving everyone an understanding about art therapy and really like what it is. And so we're going to launch with this all important question. Barbara, please describe art therapy and the way creativity informs your life.
I'm unmuted. So I'm going to have to change this up just a little bit. I will certainly answer your question, Elizabeth, but I have to introduce my dog because she is clearly here. It's Stella, and usually she's quiet when I'm working, but right now she's stop it. Good quiet. Be a good girl. So we're going to have to roll with it in terms of Stella. So your question was
to describe art therapy and the way, art therapy.
So art therapy is a master's prepared profession. It's a credentialed profession. It's a licensed profession. And people engage in providing this service in as many different kinds of settings as you would find therapy. So you would find it in inpatient psychiatric units, you would find it in clinical programs, you would also find it in enrichment programs, in community centers, in assisted care facilities, any place people are wanting to enrich and deepen their experience of their lives. So I, in particular, find art therapy as a means for problem solving and exploring and understanding my path as a human being and as a therapist. So I do a lot of what Carl Jung and Pat Allen call active imagination, which is imagining into an image or a dream and finding answers there. So I dialogue with images. I make images in response to experiences that I have. Lots of imaginal work where you kind of thicken your experience of reality by making art. And I would like to share my understanding of how creativity works. And that is that, like, I see creativity like a bubble underwater. And when you're young and you have no obstacles to your creativity, it kind of, the bubble just flows to the surface unencumbered. And your imagination is easy to access, and you play and you explore and you make art in a way that is free. As we grow up, we experience things that become like debris that falls on top of the bubble. And so what an art therapist does is really helps to, we help people remove the debris so that the bubble can rush back to the surface again and you can have freer access to your imagination. I think many people lose track of their imagination as a resource. And so their lives become dry and brittle because they take rote responses to things without going to their imagination to see what's possible. I always like to think that if you can't imagine it, you can't make it happen. So opening up creativity as a way to make more choices for yourself, envision things that could happen, it's a real powerful way to engage in your life. And I'm all about engaging in images. There's a real easy flow between my life and my images. I'll tell you one more quick story. I was walking, I wasn't going to show this piece, but I've been walking my dog since I introduced Stella, and she has a habit of catching little frogs at night. And they're about the size of a dime. And she runs around and searches for them, and she picks them up and she keeps them in her mouth for the whole walk, and then walks in the front door and opens her mouth, and they jump all over the house and she chases them. So this is how I responded to that. To share this image of Stella and the frog.
Beautiful.
So this is an example of sort of how my experience has deepened my artwork, and also, Stella has come into my life as a rescue dog and really enriched my life. And this is sort of like the story that's unfolding with me and Stella and the frog. So, so I'm going to show you my PowerPoint. So this is an image. This is an image that I did when I was making a decision to move from Chicago to California to take care of my mother. And I was pretty clear that I was going to make the decision to go, but I was ambivalent about what it would mean. In this image, I began by working with a scribble on wet watercolor paper, and the image came to the surface. And I have birds in my images often, and they're often guides and advisors. So here I am writing on my advisor's back into what's next for me, but I have a mask on, which kind of indicates my ambivalence and my lack of clarity about what's to come. I had no idea we'd be wearing masks all the time now. So now I engage in something that I call response art, which is art made to contain, explore, or express experience. I've studied response art extensively. It was the focus of my doctoral program. And many art therapists make response art. It's a way of gaining understanding about the work that you're doing in a way that clarifies your responses to the people that you're working with. It keeps you from reacting and slows you down and lets you delve into the image itself to explore. This is a piece. Don't forget that you all can ask questions.
And
So
Barbara, actually, I would like to put a question out there.
okay.
Because you brought something up that was so interesting about response art. When images come and we experience something that might be terrifying or traumatic, should people be worried that the image will frighten them?
I've never found an image that came to do any harm to the artist. I think that image making is often a way to contain fear and to hold it and so that you can put it away. I made an image of fear once out of aluminum wire and beeswax. And I took the image of fear, the sculpture, and I put it in a box and I painted the box black. And then I stacked a whole bunch of books on top of it, and it made me feel much better. So I think that there are ways of actually handling things by using materials that can bring us a lot of peace and comfort and containment.
And so I think what I'm hearing you say also is once the image is out, it's kind of out of our bodies.
It's out of our bodies, but it's also there to engage and find out why we're afraid. Like, what's the real reason? What's underneath the surface of the situation?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is a piece that I did about one of my clients. And this was a girl who was in residential care for a long, long time. And she was a girl who was very aggressive with other people. She was often in being arrested for fighting and kicked out of school and all kinds of things like that. But she also played the violin. And I was kind of in a quandary about how could someone who used their hands to fight other people could be so disciplined and controlled to learn how to play the violin. So I started this image again with wet paper and working with watercolor. And as I drew, I became aware of the sadness that she must be experiencing, spending all this time away from her family and unable to control her behavior. And so I painted her with fire in her hands because of the passion she felt for her violin, but also the out of control manifestation of her sorrow.
And Barbara, so how, after you made this image, did you interact with this image?
I did interact with this image. I had conversations with this image about how to best approach the client. And so she told me about the sadness that she felt, which was why I painted the broken heart on her chest.
Oh,
and it made a big difference in the way I approached the client. I was able to really increase my empathy and feel differently toward her instead of being so confused by her behavior.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, this piece I did about supervision. And supervision in art therapy is when a more experienced clinician guides a newer clinician in their work. And it can be done in both graduate school and postgraduate work for licensing and beyond. And so together we look at the wounds that the clients bring in. And what I realized in this piece was one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about supervision is how much I learn about myself and about the other people that I'm working with, and how in this process, I see myself. I see myself and I find myself resonating with the issues that the supervisee has and learning so much in conjunction with what they're struggling with. So
and I have another, okay. So Riva has a question.
Okay.
And Riva Weinstein, what media are you using?
This is watercolor. And one of the things that I do with my watercolors, I usually start with wet paper, and I use good paper, I use Arches, and I build the color and intensify the color over time. And as it deepens, I just stay with it, and my understanding of the situation also intensifies as the colors soak in.
Beautiful.
The last image, most of my images are watercolor.
So we have another question.
Yes.
I'm curious about your thoughts on when or if you have had experience of sharing imagery you made about a client with that client, when that might be helpful or when that might not be helpful.
I do share images with clients, but only after I really have thoroughly unpacked it for myself. Because I find that I learn so much from the images. I don't want to take an image that has pieces that I don't understand yet in it. I often make images for clients to demonstrate my understanding, and those I share. If someone is telling me that they're lonely and I do an image about how lonely that sounds to me, I would share that with the client. And they might take the image and say, no, it's much more like this. They might actually alter my image. Sometimes I make images in session with clients, and that's much more interactive. Sometimes I make them outside of session. But the images that I make in this way are more for me to get clear about my own understanding. And then eventually, if I really feel like it's unpacked and it would benefit them, because the whole point is to benefit the work of the client. I wouldn't want to bring something in that I didn't understand.
And to add to that, Barbara, you've shared with us and your students that you've actually had interactions with clients that were completely through image making and no speaking at all.
Yes. Yes.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, that happens when talking is too frightening. I mean, I've worked with a lot of kids that have had real severe abuse, and oftentimes the image is the way in. And in feeling safe, quietly drawing together can be much more of a place of gaining trust and feeling safe.
Thank you.
Okay, next one. Now, I've also developed this term called harm's touch, which is different from many of you probably heard of vicarious trauma and secondary trauma and burnout. Harm's touch offers opportunities as well as risks. It refers to the events and interactions that we witness that affect us powerfully. So when you experience something in your life that isn't necessarily primarily your experience, like you see a car accident, or you witness 9/11 on television over and over and over again, or you watch the trial of Trump on television, those things affect us, and we can carry them around and let them sort of fester, or we can find a way to handle them. And I really advocate for the use of response art to get them out of our body, as Elizabeth was saying, put them on paper so that we can interact with them and learn why they're important to us. Viktor Frankl talked about how you can, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about how you can tolerate anything if you find the meaning in it. And I think that's really true. And for me, I use image making and engaging my images in their deeper meaning to understand what they offer me. So harm's touch gives you an opportunity to gain empathy, to become more fully human, to like really understand what's bothering you about the situation. And then you can like let the residue go without carrying it around so it becomes toxic to you. I am a breast cancer survivor. And when I was going through treatment, well, when I went to the hospital and was diagnosed, I went directly from the doctor's office to the art supply store and bought enough watercolor and paper for the next 6 months. And I knew that I was going to probably have treatment, and I needed to get the medicine ready that I needed for myself. And so I went to the art supply store. And during that treatment, I had rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. This was about the chemo that every 3 weeks. And the chemo was red. So it was this viridian, alizarin crimson color. And so that came into my images. It's also the color of my heart's desire path, which is also an interesting story that I'll tell you about later. But every 3 weeks, I had to go back for another round of chemo. And I started to feel better right before I had to go back. So this image is about the chemo reaching up from the chemo river and pulling me back in just as I was about to reach for the moon. Now, these images, I did about 40 of them in a series while I was going through treatment. And they really helped me to communicate and understand my experience. I wasn't really able to talk about my experience very much during that time, but I made art a lot, and it helped to hold it until I could look back on it and talk about it. I also took all of my images with me to the doctor every time I went to help them understand my experience. And that was really helpful. And I wouldn't go to a doctor that wouldn't spend time with my images.
That's amazing. Did you ever have a doctor who just completely didn't understand or was blocked with that?
No, because when they're in front of the image, I think it sort of caught them. You know, if I were to say I'd like to bring my images in, that might be more of an opportunity for them to say, well, I don't really think that fits here. But when you pull it out of your bag and you say, this is how I feel, it's very difficult for a doctor to say, well, I'm not interested in how you feel in your images,
Right.
because it's how you feel. So they were kind of captivated. In fact, when I finished treatment, about a year and a half later, I went to the doctor and I didn't have any images. And she said, where's your artwork? And I said, oh, I guess I'm not just painting about cancer anymore. And it was like a kind of a revelation to me that it wasn't entirely my focus anymore.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Have you ever shown your work like in a gallery show? Because it's very powerful work. And if you had a progression of it as a show, I think it would be a really great show. I'm just wondering if you've ever done that.
I've shown pieces of my work. I'm interested in showing the breast cancer series.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to people.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had to get a little bit of space. I mean, sometimes when I paint, I'm like, oh, I'm not showing this to anybody. This is just for me to figure out. And by the time I finish painting it, it's almost always something that I want to share because I feel like I've learned enough to feel okay about that. It's when I'm in that sort of wondering place of not quite knowing what it's about and letting the image and the process lead me, where I'm like, oh, nobody's going to see this because who knows what this is going to be. And then, by the time I've really worked it through, then I'm fine with sharing it. And the cancer stuff, I've shared it with students, but I haven't shared it in a bigger forum. And I'd like to now, I think. Thank you.
Barbara, I have, and thank you. That was a great question. And I have another question. I'd love you to just delve for a moment into the emotional process and the somatic experience of painting itself and how the painting itself, the process, supports you in your wellness.
Oh, well, it supports everything in my wellness. It makes me stop and think about and feel about what I'm experiencing. It helps me to get it out of my body. It helps me to really sit and look at it and communicate about it. Like watching the water move on the page is powerful. Letting the brush stroke the canvas is powerful. Sometimes I need to push harder on something. And so I will like make a sculpture out of clay or I do a lot with aluminum foil and masking tape that I paint, sculptures like that. There's a lot of ways of engaging in it, but the material sort of gets called for by the exploration. So it depends on what I need, but I paint a lot. And part of it is that watching it move, watching the watercolor change on the paper, from this watery, expansive way of engaging with the paper to a more specific and more linear way, and shadows and light. And I'm a printmaker, so I do a lot of making it dark and then pulling it back up. So oftentimes I'll make the image really dark and then I'll highlight by getting the paper wet again and pulling it out with cloth. Also, sometimes the image itself will tell me that it's too tight and to put it in the bathtub and like scrub the paint off and then go back into it and see the ghost of what was there and then respond to that.
That's beautiful. And we have another question. The question is, do you ever get overwhelmed by what you make? Like, does it ever feel like the images take up too much space? And do you ever feel the need to get rid of old or less relevant images?
I feel overwhelmed before I make the images. The images help me to feel less overwhelmed. And they definitely are a presence in my life. And I find it very difficult to get rid of old images. Even though the images have told me in my dialogue with them that they're inside of me and I don't need to hold them, that I can let them go, that I will always be able to pull them back in my imagination. But I like to live with them. As I paint them, I put them up around me so I see them. I leave them set up on the table in my studio. I engage with them as deeply and consistently as possible, and I find tremendous relief in making them.
Thank you.
Okay, next one. So On September 11th, 2001, I was working at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I realized that my family had moved to San Diego and that I didn't really have people to be with during all of this. And it was really scary. It was very scary. I lived in Chicago and I was pretty much on my own. So I also had a supervision group that I worked with at the school, and I realized that many of them were from outside the country and certainly not Chicagoans. And so I called them and asked them to come to my home and to bring food to share and materials to use, and that we would make art during supervision class because the school was closed. So that was the day after September 11th, which was September 12th. And they came and we made art together and lit a candle. And this is a piece that I made during that art making session. And we all felt connected and relieved at the end of the couple of hours that we worked together, and asked to come back the next day. So I opened that up to bring people that you want to share this with. I invited my neighbors. I opened it up to family of people that wanted to come. And for more than 5 years after that, every Friday night, I lit a candle at 6:00 and people came and we made art together. People brought food to share and materials to use, and it became the Art for Peace group. And the intention of that group was to hold a space for us to come together as a community so that we could be grounded and supporting our more responsive actions in our lives instead of acting out of fear. So it was all about people like finding their center and being part of a community. And so this is the first piece that I did. And sometimes when I'm afraid of something, I will paint with a purple border. I'll do the purple border first, like a frame, and then I move into it as if I'm going through, a rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, Barbara.
Yeah.
You first sketched the images like in pencil, or is this all kind of free form?
I drew the border, and then it was wet paper with watercolor. No drawing. It was all watercolor. And this is also an image from the Art for Peace group. Now, this was done by someone else, and it's a collage with pictures from the obituaries from the newspaper. And this is an example of, you don't have to be a fine artist. You can collage, you can put together found objects, you can make things in any way that seems to suit you, that draws you, that calls for your attention. Materials are, it's all about the engagement you have with it and how you move into them and how you feel comfortable with them. I always start people at a point of mastery. I wanted to, in the beginning, I skipped this part, but I wanted to tell you all about what my intention for my participation in this speaker series is, to help people understand the artist and the art therapist, because so many of us work this way. Many people engage in their own image making process to understand and find deeper meaning in their work, but also in their lives. And so I think it's really important that the general public knows more about what art therapy is, and also finds ways to use this way of working for themselves so that you can unpack things that are bothering you or that you're joyful about. It's a way of holding an experience and finding the deeper meaning in it.
And we just got a lovely comment from Riva Weinstein, and she is saying that she just read somewhere that if you can write your name, you can draw, and that writing your name is a drawing.
Oh, that's interesting. I believe that's true. This is an image of one of the early Art for Peace groups in my dining room. And we had as many as 20 people come to the group, and they spilled in all over my house. They were everywhere and making art on my couch and on the floor. And it was a really wonderful community that developed as a result of that. This is a piece that I did about COVID. It represents my heart's desire path with the COVID masks, or the masks that we've been wearing superimposed on top of it. I feel like I've been looking at my life through a filter for the last year, as many of you do. And the barrier that we are experiencing has been profound for me. I moved to California about almost 2 years ago. So I was only here for less than a year before COVID hit. And so I feel like I'm sort of being held back from exploring my new environment and seeing what I can do out here. So this is my representation of that. And as COVID hit, I had to think about the Art for Peace group again. And I've presented it as an online forum now. And we have people from all over the country and all over the world that are coming to Art for Peace now. And it's a wonderful resource. And actually, there are a couple of new Art for Peace groups. Elizabeth Bryan-Jacobs is doing one, and Sarah Taylor is doing one, both on Thursdays. So there's more information available about those. And this is my Art for Peace group on Friday evenings.
And again, Barbara, you mentioned any materials, and so people can come with coloring books if that's what they're
Yes,
called.
they can come with coloring books. They knit. Some people bring a computer and write. Some people don't make art, just come and sit with us. My mother, who is 95 years old and hadn't sculpted for 20 years, has begun to sculpt again in the Art for Peace group. We've had people as young as 5, and I guess even younger than that, Elizabeth, your grandchild. And then the oldest is 95 and a half, she would say. So.
And from all over the world.
And from all over the world. So these are some examples of pieces that are simpler ones that certainly anybody can try to express themselves this way. This is a piece that I did about an adolescent boy who scared me. Artwork done in this way does not have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. It can just express what you are feeling. And this is really helpful to me because it got it out. I was really scared, obviously. And it helped me to convince my coworkers to give me some support going back and talking to that kid. These are pieces that were done by my nephew in the Art for Peace group, and they're aluminum foil core, and they're covered with masking tape. And he was 7 at the time. This is a piece that was done by a childcare worker who was trying to express in a workshop how torn she felt because she didn't feel like she could keep up with all the demands of her job. So really, if you can do stick figures, you can make art. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. And I always say that people should start where they feel comfortable and branch off from there. So now I want to share a short video with you that is sort of the culmination of some work that I did in around 2000. And when I found out in 1997 that I was going to be laid off from a job at the state hospital where I had worked for 9.5 years with adolescents, I needed to figure out where I was going to go and what I was going to do next. And I went immediately to the Open Studio Project and started working in a group that Pat Allen was leading that was called the Mentorship Program. And it was about the goal was to find your heart's desire path. And so I started your heart's desire. And so I started painting my heart's desire path. And Creature came and became my guide in this process. So this is a little video about that time and that situation, trying to find what's next. Douglas?
The images and stories I share in this video are part of my personal process. They evolved over the course of about 3 years. I'm sharing my work because examples are important. As I teach and work as an art therapist, I use my images and stories as examples of how this practice works in my life. I believe I'm richer and have more to offer as a person and a therapist when I'm involved in this process. I hope by sharing my work, I will encourage others to delve into their imaginations. Creativity brings clarity. It can bring you support in your own story, whether you swim underwater, live in a cave, or fly from a mountain. And the story starts. There once was a girl who lived underwater. She spent her time mostly in relation to the current, moving purposefully against it, taking great pride in small progress. She quickly tired, giving in to the current, moving with its energy and direction. She felt aimless, without purpose. So she began to move on her own again, defying the current's strength and direction, pushing past its tide pools and waves, bubbles of air pushing past her mouth, blurring her vision. Once again she was spent, tired of pushing and disappointed in her efforts to overcome the current. One day as she drifted, she opened her eyes wide and realized without the struggle she could see clearly. She realized maybe she was not the one to determine what her direction should be. The girl's realization was short-lived. Soon she began to struggle and thrash against the current once more, only to have her progress eroded to nothing as her fatigue set in and she surrendered to the current. The cycle continued for many years. The girl allowed herself small glimpses of clear seeing while she drifted with the current, and then she pushed them away with her need to struggle. And the current says, I will hold you as long as you need me, to give you direction or opposition. I do have respect for your integrity. You do try to do the right thing. But somehow you believe it must be so hard. Can't the right thing feel natural and easy? Can't it flow and take you with it? I have cycles. I am consistent. I will be here forever. You can trust me. And the girl said, I do trust you. It's my direction I don't trust. Do I flail, swim, or float? What's right for me? And the current said, use your vision to inform you. Notice when you're clear and start there. So the girl started there as she drifted with her eyes open. A helper came. The current held her up as she listened to the creature. He took her on many adventures in her head, trying things out there first. As she let herself follow, she became less afraid. I learned about the field of art therapy as an adult. I've always known and used my imagination to understand my life. Sometimes people forget how to access their imagination. Many become dry and rote in their lives and relationships with others. As an art therapist, I help people begin to access their imaginations again. Some people can do this on their own. Others use the support of a therapist who accompanies them on their journey. Some people hold themselves back, waiting for reassurance. Sharing my images may be helpful. Art therapists use image-making process for everything from traditional psychotherapy and treatment facilities to developmental play with media for personal growth and enrichment. I believe in the creative process that I offer others. Being an art therapist that doesn't make art is like being a priest that doesn't pray. I believe that art has the power to bring clarity, and I use this process in my life. I believe it has helped me be more present and awake to the world as well as live more intentionally. The point again, this time empty. It feels appropriate to see my clear seeing place at this time, moving on, into open space. The heart's desire path with the bird carrying more hope. Is that what's happening? And the bird says, I don't carry hope, it's always there. Sometimes it's hard to see. Always there on the other side. Your job is to be present, to attend to the task at hand in the moment. And I say, you look familiar. And the bird said, you used to paint me when you were angry. Now you paint me because you're free. I can fly and so can you. Let yourself move, be held by your faith, paint your way. And I say, I will, but it's sad to move on. And the bird said, put all the images from here in your heart and carry them with you on your heart's desire path. And I say, where's my creature? I expected him today. And the bird said, be grateful for what you have. Messengers come as they're needed. My message to you is see clearly from the point. Remember you can fly and be present with clarity and depth. And I say thank you.
That was so powerful, Barbara. Thank you for really allowing us to witness that process of yours, really. And I'm sure
Thank you.
That everyone has lots and lots of questions. So we're actually going to open the Q&A now.
Have you ever had to grieve the loss of one of the characters from your images?
I have not had to grieve the loss of one of my characters. I have used them to grieve loss. I painted about when my grandmother died. I've done paintings about people I've lost. I look at a lot at sort of the persona or way that we enter the world consciously and shadow. I don't think about them as opposites. I think, according to Jung, he talked about the more evolved you are, the more seamless the barrier between your conscious and unconscious is. And that the more seamless the barrier between your outward world and your inward world is. And so I don't think about it in terms of polarity. I think of it more in terms of opening up the barriers between so that I can see more of the flow. I think the diametrically opposed stuff gets us in a lot of trouble in a lot of places, including our artwork. So I'm kind of open to where the image leads me, and I do a lot of shadow work.
Well, I have one.
Okay.
Have you showed that picture that you paint for the young woman that play violin, that have a broken heart, to that particular person? And
I did not.
So what was her reaction?
I did not. I painted that to get myself back situated in a place where I could be helpful to her. This was about me being off balance because, you know, her aggression was frightening, and she was so explosive, but I needed to like get my feet on the ground so that I could be helpful to her. I don't think that showing her that image would have been helpful. I think it would have thrown her off balance, and that wasn't my intention. My intention was to be more helpful to her in her therapy and understand my role with her more. I don't always, I mostly do. And my images, I do a lot of art-based research. And so I let my images tell me about what it is that I'm exploring. And when I was working on understanding art-based research, my images talked to me about letting go and not being so figurative and letting the image take the lead and become more abstract. So I did some abstract work then. I have done quite a bit of abstract work, but lately the images have become more figurative. Sometimes they get very surreal and not very naturalistic, but mostly figurative. I always think that artwork really demonstrates the whole idea of the shadow work that I do that's more psychological, because I don't think you can get any kind of volume if you don't have shadow. If you don't have highlight and shadow, everything goes flat. So you need both to understand the form you're working with clearly. So it's a metaphor for the whole understanding of what you push under in your own psyche that you don't want to accept. It takes a lot of energy to do that, and it flattens out your life when you're not able to understand those pieces. So I like to work with light in my work. I look a lot at Vermeer, and I really like to see where light is coming from and where light is absent from, and reflected light I find really interesting to work with. Okay, well, PhD programs, there's an expressive therapy program at Lesley University that is a good one that I would recommend. And there's also interesting things done in depth psychology at Pacifica in Santa Barbara. Lesley's in Boston. So those are two PhD programs that I would recommend. And also, in terms of the second question was novice. Right.
Novice.
Yeah. One of the ways that I remember first, my mother is an artist, and she made materials available when I was a child, and I've always been making things. But the other thing that I would talk about is, or think about, is just the way you like when you lie on the ground and look at the clouds and imagine animals and see the forms changing and shifting, like let yourself wander into an ambiguous space on the paper or in the clay or whatever it is that you're working with. It's about imagining into what could possibly form and following it that way. Sorry.
And a scribble, Barbara. Where would you start the scribble? Was there?
I'm sorry. Stella has decided that she saw something. Where would I start a scribble?
Or how would somebody start a scribble who has never made one before?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I would do is find materials I was comfortable with, whether it's crayons or a number 2 pencil with an eraser, and just let yourself wander into it. Don't judge it. Don't plan it. Just let your hand move on the page, and let there be an interaction between your hands and the materials that you're using that can inform what's next. And, you know, I always say it's just paper, you know, it's just paper. So let yourself play, you know, let yourself move into it in a way that's not about judgment. That's one of the reasons why I use wet paper, because you can't control it.
And materials really can be anything. We were talking yesterday about environmental artist Andy Goldsworthy.
Right.
So,
absolutely, that's a really good reference, because those of you that don't know, he uses objects in nature. He makes sculptures out of ice and out of leaves, mandalas out of leaves. He does many, many, many ephemeral pieces that are amazing and are like powerful and artistic, and then they're gone. So like finding things outside, or looking at pieces that you want to repurpose into things, or the way the light hits the side of the building, or those kinds of things just inspire moving into the work in a playful kind of way that just picks up on those small fragments.
beautiful. And you had mentioned something, we were talking about light and shadow, and I know there is one more image that you wanted to share that's particularly wonderful for that conversation.
So this is the image, and I wanted to share this with you because this is another image about my ambivalence and about like trying to find my path and the light and how you can move into this. And in this image, I would have a conversation with both of the birds and see what their agenda is, like, where are you carrying me? And why am I reaching for the light that the other bird is holding? And then I would have a conversation with myself. Like, how do I feel about this? Where do I want to be? And what's happening in this image? So I would sit with it and wander into it and then engage it in a dialogue in active imagination. Now, not everybody uses active imagination that's an art therapist. I just find it a really wonderful, enchanting way to engage images that gives me a lot of information about what my deeper knowing is, and helps me access information that I just wasn't aware of. So I would encourage all of you to let yourself wander into your images and let them speak to you. Well, there's Art Therapy Finder through the American Art Therapy Association. There are local chapters. Many art therapists have websites. You might want to like Google art therapy and your location and see who's around you. Or you may want to do something virtually. One of the gifts of COVID is that people have really shifted and are able to engage in online art therapy in a way that is really, really wonderful. It's surprising that it works so well to connect that way. So there are lots of ways of doing that.
That was just so wonderful and powerful. And Barbara, did you have any other words of wisdom for us? Any final?
Yeah, I think that my biggest point is that we can trust the process. We can trust the creative process, that our imaginations are not there to hurt us. They're a place where we can play and learn and explore and enrich our lives. And if you can't imagine it, you can't make it happen. So trust the process and let your images guide you.
That is a beautiful piece of wisdom as an end note. So I'm going to invite you to chime us out. And just before you do that, I want to just also mention to everyone, please stay after Barbara chimes, because we're super excited to share next month's program and the art therapist who will be with us next month, Jill Mcnutt. So Barb, you can chime. Beautiful. Jill Mcnutt is an amazing human being. I'll just start with that. She is a medical art therapist and advocate at Aurora Healthcare, and Jill's specialty is cancer care. She is also a founding member of the Art Therapy House, providing art therapy services through Wisconsin communities. And not only did she run the art therapy program at St. Mary of the Woods College, she's also shared her expertise through authoring book chapters, journal articles, and presenting in local and national forums. Jill has also served the art therapy community as an educator, director, and current chair of the research committee of the American Art Therapy Association. So you won't want to miss this. I said to Jill this morning, whenever I have a question about research or I'd like another opinion, I always go to Jill. I believe Jill before anyone. So, and she's an incredible artist with so much to share about her art process. So a big thank you and namaste to Barbara J. Fish, artist, educator, art therapist extraordinaire, and my personal mentor in life. Thank you to everyone here for joining us today. And thank you, BB, Douglas, Elizabeth Hammer, again, for supporting this program. And, we can't thank you all enough for being here. So excited to see you, and we can't wait for next month. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, everyone.